Hello and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. I'm Brandi Kruse. Happy Thursday to all of you. Our final live show of the week. We're going to have some in-depth interviews today on the public safety crisis in Washington and what was and was not done in Olympia this legislative session to try to address it. Ever since January, when the session began, and even before that, I've kind of raised attention to two key issues on the public safety front. One of them is the need to criminalize drug possession before our existing drug possession law sunsets on July 1st. That's kind of a no-brainer, right? The other one was the need to reform the broken police pursuit policy in Washington state. Now, as you know, the drug possession thing didn't get done. So as of right now, unless something happens, as of July 1st, it's just de facto legalized to have hard drugs in the state. The pursuit situation was improved, but not improved enough. So on the show today, we're going to hear from two Democratic senators in Washington state, Senator Mark Mullet and Senator John Lovick, on where they landed on those issues and some of the failures to get this stuff across the finish line. We'll also hear from Republican State Representative Skylar Rude, who's going to give the Republican perspective on that issue. Also coming up momentarily, Tucker Carlson has broken his silence, releasing a video. And look, I watched Tucker Carlson some nights. I didn't have a strong opinion of him one way or the other, but I understand how consequential he was to American media and American politics. But I'll tell you, this video he posted, it hit me right in the soul. I was like, 100%. I agreed with every single word that came out of his mouth, and so I'm going to play just a clip of that for you. But first, Nicole, hello.
Hey, Brandi.
Happy birthday, Nicole.
Oh, look at you. I didn't even see you grab that.
Yeah, I'm super
Very
sneaky. And now everybody on the live stream, we're going to sing happy birthday to Nicole. And you're not allowed to take your video down. And we're going to watch how awkward it is for you to have everyone sing happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Dun, dun, dun. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Nicole.
So cute.
Happy birthday to you. I can't actually deliver this cake to you because I'm tethered over here. Do you want to see? Give it one good effort. Yeah, I can't. Not even close. Do I have permission to blow it out for you?
Yes, please.
You know what else? Mike picked this up for you last night.
Aww.
And it's gluten-free.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Gluten-free. Now, Dr. Ryan Coogan with Eastside Weight Loss Clinic, if you're watching, I don't plan to eat any of this. However, I might have a little bite because life's all about balance.
Yes.
But it is gluten-free, and Nicole turned 31 today.
31.
So we want to... There you go. You know what's great is I know that everybody listening on the live stream totally sang happy birthday. We couldn't hear them, but I know that they totally did.
I'm impressed with your willingness to sing.
Wait, are you trying to say I'm not a good singer?
No, and you're a great singer.
That's not true either.
But, I mean, I'm not going to slam the person that just sang me happy birthday. But thank you, Brandi.
You're welcome. And I feel bad because I didn't even know it was her birthday this week until she reminded me on like Tuesday. I'm like, dang, that's right. Okay.
Well, I knew that I normally remind you about birthdays.
You do. I'm terrible at that.
That's always my kind of thing. So you would be mad at me if I hadn't reminded you.
I would have felt awful. But everybody on the stream knew it was your birthday already. So
Matt probably would have told you.
Happy 31st birthday, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy that you're here.
Thank
happy
you.
I get to hang out with you every day. Love it.
What a great place to celebrate.
What a great place. Okay, all right. Now that we've thoroughly embarrassed Nicole, she can take herself off camera. Really quick, I'm going to get into these interviews we have. We got some meaty interviews today, so I hope that's the vibe you guys are ready for today. But I want to talk about Tucker Carlson releasing a video. All he did is put out a video on Twitter. It was like a little over 2 minutes. I'm not going to play the whole thing. It wasn't petty. It didn't address his firing at all. It just addressed his opinion on the state of the country and kind of where we find ourselves. And I'll tell you, it just spoke to me. Here's a little clip of what Tucker Carlson had to say.
Suddenly, the United States looks very much like a one-party state. That's a depressing realization, but it's not permanent. Our current orthodoxies won't last. They're brain dead. Nobody actually believes them. Hardly anyone's life is improved by them. This moment is too inherently ridiculous to continue, and so it won't. The people in charge know this. That's why they're hysterical and aggressive. They're afraid. They've given up persuasion. They're resorting to force. But it won't work. When honest people say what's true, calmly and without embarrassment, they become powerful.
Yeah, and that's what really hit me. When honest people say what's true, calmly and without embarrassment, they become powerful. And I think that's what we try at least to preach on this show, which is the fringes and the extremes of both parties. They love to throw out labels. They love to vilify people that don't agree with them. And it's the way that regular common sense Americans, reasonable Americans, get scared into silence. And so for Tucker to say, you know, when you have common sense people who tell the truth calmly, that can have a huge influence. And he's totally right. And he also said there, this moment that we're in is too inherently ridiculous to continue. And I agree with that as well. We're at this point where, and we'll talk about some stories today, you know, we do our unbelievable segment every day and our sanity check at the end of every episode. And some of those stories, it's like, this has to be, how can we be living in a place where this is even a generally accepted thought, like the Olympia School District Board, which is like talking about how fourth grade wind instruments are a product of white supremacy and just dumb stuff like that. And it really comes back to what Tucker Carlson said at the end there, which is, you know, when reasonable people speak truth calmly, they have a lot of power. And calmly and without shame or fear of being labeled and being vilified. And it's about, you know, giving a voice, an increasingly loud voice, to a chorus of Americans who are fed up. I've always said this isn't about right or left. It's about reasonable and unreasonable. And I think we're in a period right now where reasonable people have an opportunity to change the course of our country. So Tucker did not say in that video what he plans to do. I'm sure it will be something consequential. I hope he kind of does something on his own. Nicole and I talked about the fact that that seems like what would make the most sense for him. And even though, like I said, you know, I wasn't someone who had really strong feelings about Tucker Carlson one way or the other, but I did understand how consequential he was to American discourse. That's going to continue. I don't necessarily think he needs a news network or any sort of streaming service or whatever to continue that level of influence. And I also felt like when he was working with Fox, he was one of the only members of the corporate media that I felt like was operating independently. Like, I truly felt like when I did watch his show, he was saying and covering what he wanted to be covering, whatever, you know, Fox News be damned. And I think that's a good thing. So maybe he just ought to go out and do things independently. Okay, I want to dive into some in-depth interviews. We've been having state lawmakers in the studio this past week, now that the legislative session is over, to talk a little bit about what got accomplished, what didn't get accomplished. We're going to play more from these interviews on the Sunday show. I'll talk about that in a moment, but I wanted to focus today really on the issue of public safety and those two topics that we talked about. Police pursuits and trying to give some power back to law enforcement to actually pursue the criminals that are wreaking havoc on our streets, and the fact that one of their number one priorities, which should have been passing a law to make drug possession a crime in Washington state, didn't get done. And now they're behind the scenes trying to scramble to call a special session and come to a consensus on something before July 1st, when we wouldn't have a law on the books. So two Democratic state senators made stops to the studio this week. One of them is Senator Mark Mullet. And before I get to that conversation, I just want to pop up this article from the Seattle Times. Danny Westneat, I am really proud of Danny Westneat for actually speaking the truth. The headline of his article is really simple. Why Democrats, you had one job. You had one job. And in it, he talks about just the need for them to, one, own up to the fact that they didn't get a Blake fix done, that they weren't able to accomplish it in time. We talked about the fact that Democrats wanted to blame Republicans for not getting it done, which is stupid because Republicans are in the minority. Danny Westneat wrote, "Sorry, but no. Regular readers know I am fine castigating Republicans for all manner of political misdeeds, but Democrats have an 18-seat majority in the state house, a 9-seat majority in the state Senate, and the governorship. There's no filibuster here. Local Republicans have been beaten down by voters so badly, they have close to zero governing clout left. You can't point at the group that's on life support and say they made us fail." 100%. And I was glad that the two Democrats who we invited in, who you'll hear from momentarily, agreed that it was a little bit absurd to cast any sort of blame on Republicans for failing to get a drug possession law on the books. I want to start with part of our interview with State Senator Mark Mullet. He's I would say he's the most moderate Democrat left in the caucus in the Senate. And Mark Mullet represents the area around Issaquah. And one of the things that he and I talked about is whether his party has given too much deference, too much control to the far left fringe, and whether giving them that control is leading to the failure on some of these public safety issues. So here's part of my conversation with Senator Mark Mullet. Senator Mullet, thank you for being here.
Hey, happy to be here.
What the hell happened with Blake? Let's just dive right in. I don't even care how your session was, how you're doing now.
I think it was obviously a really disappointing end. I think it was very predictable. The way that bill worked is you had to have the bill agreed to by Saturday evening because it had to sit for 24 hours. You can't amend it. It has to get an up or down vote. The idea for that was usually when you can't amend a bill, it's easier to pass it because people can't sabotage it. But the real mistake was on Saturday with, I think, the House decided to put a version that never had 50 votes. And I don't understand because we had handed them language that did have 50 votes in the House and would have passed. And for whatever reason, they chose not to take that language and they went with a path they went on and ended up with no bill.
Help me understand from an insider perspective how unusual it is for a Democratic majority and a Democratic Speaker of the House to bring a bill like that to the floor in the final hours without having the votes.
It just doesn't usually happen. But the people on their side who were voting no, we knew were going to vote no. It was a 43 vote bill. And so they were always relying on the Republicans to come along. And I think they were all part of the conversation on Saturday. We were trying to get a bipartisan bill. And so it was just surprising with the House leadership choosing not to take the bipartisan bill and to run with the bill that, had Democratic support, but we knew not enough Democratic support. And so that was a very strange strategic decision by House leadership.
But I guess I'm confused because Governor Inslee had a press conference after, and he said he was told earlier in the day that it had enough votes to pass. So was he misled? Was the speaker misled about the vote count? I guess I'm confused.
Yeah, I think I don't really buy those arguments on their side. I think, those of us who were in the middle of the issue that weekend, we knew that there weren't enough Democratic votes to pass the bill, and the Republicans have been crystal clear. They will bring votes for the bill with the changes that we're getting from the people on the ground who have to implement the bill. That's like the cities, the prosecutors, the police. Those changes were not crazy. They were actually a reasonable list of changes. And the hope was, hey, we're going to do a bipartisan bill, and we're going to actually get this done on the last day.
I have to ask you, because I think you're one of the only people who'll be intellectually honest about it from the Democratic side. The governor and some, including Senator Andy Billig, some Democratic leaders, twisted it to blame Republicans. Like, oh, Republicans didn't give us any votes. Is that a fair interpretation?
I don't, and to Senator Billig, I will say my experience this whole session is he was trying to pass a bipartisan bill. He voted for the bipartisan bill on the Senate side that did pass. I think with the governor, I was surprised by his lack of engagement on Saturday when we were actually, Saturday is what really counted, right? Because you had to get the version of the bill that you knew would pass put on the bar so it could sit there for 24 hours. And that's where I was surprised the governor was not fully engaged. And when people said, oh, we have a deal, when you looked at the vote for that deal, it was a party line vote, 4 Democrats, 2 Republicans. That's a signal to the world that you don't have a bipartisan bill. If you have a bipartisan bill, that's not how votes come out. They don't come out on a 4-2, party line vote. And so that vote indicated, I thought, to everybody that we were set up for disaster on Sunday night, which is what ended up happening.
But to be clear, do you agree with my assessment that it's gaslighting for the governor to suggest that Republicans are to blame?
Yeah, I think it's absurd that he's suggesting this.
Yeah.
I think at this point, you definitely, I think the House Democrats made a choice to not do the bipartisan version of the bill. That was their choice. I think they thought maybe that House Republicans would feel guilted into voting for something just because they felt like they had to, or I don't know what it was. But I think the takeaway for me from 2 years ago was it's not just whether it's a misdemeanor or gross misdemeanor. Like 2 years ago, the House had put on language around 2 diversions, and we were like, oh, well, this was better than nothing. Well, in hindsight, that wasn't better than nothing, because the police on the ground never knew who got diversions.
Right.
So it just ended up being de facto drug decriminalization. And so the goal this time around was actually listen to the input from the people on the ground. But I will say, I think Senator Andy Billig was actually trying to solve the problem and get a bipartisan bill the entire session. I don't think that was the case from the governor's office. I don't think that was the case from the House leadership. I think the Senate was kind of on an island of really trying to have a bipartisan solution.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things to unpack, but when I look at what happened in the House and the fact that they had enough progressive Democrats who thought the bill went too far, which I think is a ludicrous belief, are they giving, did House Democratic leadership give too much deference to that faction of their party?
Yeah, I think they did. I mean, I think
out of fear? What out of what?
I mean, I think that that's a good question. I think, the Seattle delegation has a strong, they play a strong role in the House Democratic Caucus. They have the most members, sort of thing. And I think leadership is usually afraid if that delegation gets really upset that their own power could be at risk, right? Because basically the majority leaders in Olympia, they're for majority of the caucus has to support them, right? And so I think they do get really nervous if they feel there's a large number of their own caucus who's upset with what's going on. And I think that probably played out this last weekend.
Yeah, but it was particularly disappointing to see what happened in the House, given what you guys were able to accomplish in the Senate, which I think was a bill that was passed with 14 Republicans and 14 Democrats. Yeah. As the definition of bipartisan, which is what you hope for on an issue that's this consequential.
And that was the bill that I put on the Ways and Means Committee.
Yeah.
We kind of took the original committee bill. We then took all the input from a variety of stakeholders, and in Ways and Means, I put on the version that ended up passing the Senate with 28 votes on an even split, which I think was the right policy outcome for this session.
Well, it's like exactly what you hope for, and then it just all went down in flames. So what is happening right now? Because the governor has said, this is unacceptable, we got to fix this, which I share your sentiment that, well, where were you during the session?
Yeah.
So what is happening right now to get it done?
So when I was down there on Monday, when I met with Senator Andy Billig, he is still committed to getting it fixed. I think he's made it crystal clear we will go to a one-day special session. The language that has bipartisan support, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. That wheel existed on Saturday afternoon. So it's really a question of the House saying, hey, we're going to let that version of the bill come up for a vote. The second the House says they'll let that version of the bill come up for a vote, we can have a one-day special session and we can go down and get this thing done.
Will they do that, though?
I hope so.
The fear, and I just in your seat a couple days ago, we had Senator John Braun, and he was saying his real fear is that Democrats, knowing it'll look bad if they don't get something done before July 1st, and wanting to still appease that fringe of the House Democratic Caucus, that they'll just get together, agree on something as a Democratic Party in both chambers that is watered down, and they'll push it through without any care or concern for what Republicans think about it. Is that a possibility?
I think there's enough Democrats in the Senate who are committed to a bipartisan solution. When it comes to public safety, I actually think the Republicans have a lot of good ideas on the public safety front. And I, for one, incorporate and listen to those ideas. And I think there's enough folks in the Senate that would demand that, we have to have a bipartisan solution. And you get better outcomes in Olympia when you have bills that both sides of the aisle have bought into. And on this issue right now, given how challenging drug possession is in the state of Washington and drug addiction, we have to get this one right. And it really has to be bipartisan.
Would you vote for a bill that is watered down?
I would not.
You would not. And I got that same commitment from Senator John Lovick this week. So you've been clear on that. Has
Crystal
that
clear.
been communicated to House leadership that I will not support anything watered down from what we came together on?
I think that's our goal now, is to really force that, to make sure they understand that there is a group of us in the Senate who feel strongly enough that, and it's really, for me, it goes back to 2 years ago when, I voted for the bill that made it a misdemeanor with the 2 diversions. And my big takeaway from that is I have to do a better job of listening to the people on the ground who are going to implement the bill. And so watering this thing down when everyone who has to actually implement this policy is telling me that's really not helping us solve the problem, I'm not going to make the same mistake I did 2 years ago. I want this version to actually work and make it so if you see people using drugs in public, the police can actually deal with that in a way that, and even like we're talking now, is there's a very heavy treatment focused bill. But anybody who thinks the status quo is working, I don't know what planet they're on. It's not working. We got to make a change. And hopefully we'll do the one-day special session, make the change.
So it's really about bringing along those progressive members in the House who would not support the bipartisan language. That's what's really the issue here.
And I don't expect them to support it. I just want it to come up for a vote. Like,
Okay.
This is a time for democracy to prevail.
Yeah.
And so that is our ultimate challenge right now. We had the votes in the House to pass a version of the bill that was very reasonable. But House leadership has to let that version of the bill that is bipartisan actually get an up or down vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. And that's the whole focus, I think, of, and once they agree to do that, our work is done. We can have the one-day special session, and it's very easy to accomplish that. I know for 100% fact that we have the bipartisan votes on the Senate side and an agreement from Senator Billig to let it come up for a vote.
Gotcha. And as a reminder to folks, when you say House leadership, that is your own party that you're saying they need to let this thing come up for a vote. But
That's an accurate statement.
It is not. It's not the only issue that we've sort of faced this refusal of members of your party to bring important pieces of legislation up for a vote. It was also an issue that I know you were deeply involved in on the pursuit law. I'm fascinated to hear about some of the behind the scenes. I know a lot of what happens in caucus is a secret. I get it. But, we're going through this whole ordeal with trying to fix the pursuit law, which I know you were very passionate about doing. And you have Senator Manka Dhingra, who, these are my words, not yours, is living in complete fantasy land about what data she's using to, make her judgments on that bill. But she refused to let it get a hearing in committee. And so essentially she was saying, I will force this to die in committee. And I know that you were working, and I think it was, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was your doing to get that bill plucked out of committee and brought to the floor for a vote. Is that a wrong interpretation?
No, there was a group of us who were extremely frustrated.
Yeah.
And once again, I think, Andy Billig was also, he understood the argument. It was very clear the House was not going to send us a pursuit bill. It was very clear if we wanted to take action on it, we had to go out. And in our 6 years of being in the majority in the Senate, I've never seen that happen. We've never gone in and taken a bill out of committee that the committee chair refused to hear. And I think you're accurate. I don't think Senator Dhingra wanted to hear it because she just didn't support the policy. And so, but at the end of the day, it happened. I know I personally wanted a stronger version of the pursuit bill, but life down in Olympia is incremental. Like, you sometimes just have to take the best you can get given the political environment, and that's what we did on the pursuit bill. And so we got one out, and hopefully it makes a big difference, and hopefully it's an issue we continue to revisit until we have something that actually works and is functional on the ground.
And I want to talk about the likelihood of that, but it's sort of wild, everything, the way it happened, because Republicans had tried to pluck the House pursuit bill out of committee and bring it to the floor for a vote, and Democrats are like, we don't do that. We're not going to do that. We're not going to go against procedure. And then we were down in Olympia for a public safety rally on the steps of the Capitol, advocating for a change in the pursuit law when everybody's like, gets the text of flurry is like, they're pulling the Senate version out of committee and bringing it to the floor. So can you kind of get into, given that the House Democrats said, oh, we would never do that, we're not going to do that, how was that made possible to do that on the Senate side and pluck it from certain death and bring it to the floor? Like, to the extent you're willing, how was the caucus convinced to do that when the House would not do it?
Yeah, I think the discussion was basically, if it's the version, this one specific version, which wasn't everything, car theft, and there's other things I wish were part of the pursuit. But the agreement was, if it's this one specific version and we have an agreement that when we bring it to the floor that we don't let people muck it up and make, or muck it up's not the right word, but we're not going to add
Republican amendments to make it better. Sure, yeah. Okay.
We're not going to add more to it.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was a fair deal at the time.
Okay.
And so that was the agreement. We're going to take out the version of the bill that doesn't solve everyone's problems, but it's clearly much better than doing nothing. And then we had to agree that we're not going to let amendments hang on the floor. And that's what finally happened. But like I said, it was highly unusual, and I haven't seen that happen before. Hopefully it's a good sign that it can happen in the future. And, although it's good when it happens on bills that you support.
Right.
It's really not good when it happens on bills you don't like.
Right, so. But as you've made the argument, there were enough, and that was my chief frustration. There was this wonderful bipartisan proposal that if you put it on the floor of the House and Senate would have passed without any changes or watering down. And I think there's this deep frustration, again, that you have a party that, wants to be very consistent as a caucus, doesn't want disagreements in the caucus to spill out onto the floor. But I almost felt like it was putting the party above what was best for the people of Washington by not letting the good version, the good bipartisan version, come up for a vote.
And I think you see that. I mean, that's a challenge you see back in D.C. when it comes. Yeah, you see it on a variety of issues, right? Like in D.C., I wish, that marijuana people didn't have to use the shadow cash system, that they could actually just use the banking system.
Marijuana people.
That has the votes, back in D.C. It just doesn't come up for a vote. And so many times it just, for whatever reason, I always say I wish there was ability to have like a little special, every member got one little red flag they could throw to say, hey, I want this bill to come up for a vote.
Yeah, one challenge. And it's one of my biggest frustrations with just the two-party system in general, is I do think there's a lot of individualism that's stripped from individual lawmakers, where you kind of feel pressured or compelled to have to go with the party and not with what you feel like is best for people. Do you feel that pressure when you're down there to choose between what you think is best for your constituents and what the party wants?
It's definitely there. And I think a lot of my own personal political misery of why, I was attacked from my own, from people on the left end of the Democratic Party was because I do try to do that. And I try to put what I think the people in the district I represent above what I think the overall Democratic Party might want.
That is part of my conversation with Senator Mark Mullet, a Democrat from Issaquah, one of obviously the more moderate members, if not the most moderate member of the Senate Democratic Caucus. And I appreciate, the way that he approached the public safety issue. And as he and I discussed there, he was pretty integral behind the scenes of getting something done on police pursuits. Was it perfect? No. Are there issues with it? Yes. Does it address stolen vehicles? No. Do I think that's problematic? Yes. I'm just having a whole conversation with myself. But he and I were in the same camp of something is better than nothing. And if he could get his Democratic colleagues to agree to something, that in that instance was better than nothing. And I have a little poll going on in YouTube in the live chat asking people if they believe Democrats will be willing next session to come back and improve the police pursuit bill. And right now, 89% of people say no, which I tend to kind of agree with, which bums me out. But I also wanted to, on the same subject, remember that, one of the important things for us on this show is to platform reasonable voices. Because I think too often on corporate media and the mainstream media, they tend to highlight voices that are on the extremes of both sides. And I just don't think that's where most people live. And so there's another member of the Senate Democratic Caucus, Senator John Lovick, who on these two issues was on Team Common Sense. Now, he and I had several interviews during the legislative session where I expressed kind of confusion or frustration toward him about what happened with police pursuits, because John Lovick was a member of law enforcement, and he comes out beginning of the session and drops an awesome bipartisan fix to police pursuits that would have given so much power back to law enforcement to deal with the insanity on our streets. And then you slowly started to see him sort of, I think, cave to pressure to weaken it, to move away from fixing it. And so he and I had many conversations about that on the air. But I wanted to play his sort of thoughts, again, on what happened with drug possession and on his frustration with drug possession, but also on his where he stands right now with the police pursuit issue. Again, Senator John Lovick, a Democrat from Mill Creek. So when you realized that was not going to get done by the end of the session, what was your reaction?
Well, my reaction was I watched the floor debate, and I was a little bit troubled because, you have to have 50 votes. And I was concerned that I had not seen during my time in the legislature a policy come to the floor without having the votes. You know, we do a vote count, and I was wondering if maybe they were just doing this to try and whip members into shape. And it occurred to me that this was not going to happen, and this was going to be the topic. And the topic should have been all of the good things that we did, you know, working on housing, putting all of the money into other things. And this is what we talked about. We tend to, I like to focus on the good, but we tend to find ourselves focusing on the bad, and rightfully so. We did not get it done. Even though my caucus and the Senate passed it over, at the end of the day, we failed a lot of people.
You mentioned it, but I guess it also surprised me. Lori Jenkins has been doing this for a long time.
Very
so do you know
talented lady.
anything that we don't know that happened behind the scenes where she was duped into believing they had the votes, or why she would, or have you heard anything about why they would bring that to the floor at the 11th hour without the votes? And it wasn't just like one or two. It was a significant number of votes they were down.
No, I don't, because one of the things you cannot do is you cannot talk about conversations that take place in caucus. And she is a tremendously talented person. I worked with her. I was the speaker for a full 9 months and passed the gavel over to her, the first female speaker. And I was quite honored to do that. And I worked with her. I have no idea what happened. Vote counting is a tough business. You rely on people to tell you how they are going to vote on something, but I had not seen anything during my time in the legislature come to the floor without the votes.
Mm-hmm. Is it disappointing to you, the Democrats on the House side, that voted against it?
Well, you know what? While I'm disappointed, I always tell people I vote my conscience, I vote my district, and then I vote my state. And they have to vote their conscience. And then they have to vote for what's best for their district. And then they have to vote for what's best for the state. So I might be disappointed, but I have to respect the process, because everything that we do, it's about the process and the system that we have in place.
I will say something that annoyed me is Governor Jay Inslee had a press conference after the fact, and so did Democratic leadership, and both Senator Billig and the governor blamed Republicans in some form or fashion, which I find to be deeply disingenuous. Do you think Republicans are to blame for what happened?
Look, I'm not going to blame anybody right now. What I'm going to say is I would have loved to have had some Republican votes. We had 14 Republican votes in the Senate.
On a different bill.
I know, and we're supposed to work together, so I'm not going to blame other people. I just feel that this is something that I'm not ready to do the blame game. What I want us to do is to, roll up our sleeves and get back to work and get the job done, because that's what people expect of us. The person walking out there, the person going home every night, the person taking his or her daughter to school or her son to daycare, they don't care that we're standing here playing these blame games. They tell us every day, we elect you to govern. And I think in this case, and I hate to get a little emotional about it, but maybe we as a whole didn't govern the way we should have governed.
Well, I like to see emotion because people are dying. People are dying. People are being victimized at record levels. And if you're not emotional about it, then I don't think that there's a place for you in Olympia. If this is an issue that doesn't make you emotional. And so what do you think is going to happen now? Because the governor basically said, if they can get together on something, we'll do a brief special session and we'll get it through before July 1st. Is that you had 4 months? They had 4 months to do it.
Well, but we can get together. We've had special sessions before. I know Senator June Robinson, who has worked, she's from the 38th District, worked day and night on this legislation. I would text her seriously at midnight, and she would text me back. I was just text to see how she was doing. She was working with members. We're going to get something done. I'm confident. If the governor calls us back, we're going to all go back. But I think when we go back, we will have worked out a deal, and that's the way the process works. I've seen it before. Yeah,
and I did. And to the point on June Robinson, I just had on Marysville Mayor John Nearing yesterday, and he had nothing but wonderful. He's frustrated, but he had nothing but wonderful things to say about the Snohomish County delegation and the ability to work across party lines to say, look, what are we going to do about this crisis? One of the fears that I heard it expressed from Senator John Braun on our show earlier in the week, is that Democrats will kind of cave in to the part of their party that wants to reduce the law enforcement aspect. And they'll do it by themselves, and they'll come back and push through a weaker bill than what you voted for in the Senate using just Democratic support. Would you support a weaker bill than the one that you voted for in the Senate?
So I'm going to say this now, and I'll state it parenthetically. I will not support a weaker bill. because I've been told time and time again that we need the carrot and we also need the stick, and I think the stick has to be the piece about a gross misdemeanor. So I do not plan to support a weaker bill.
I appreciate
I know John Braun well. He sits just in front of me on the Senate floor, and John Naring is a good friend of mine, and I know the issues. They're honest in their assessment, and they're fair when you talk with them, and they want to take the politics out and get the job done, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the firm commitment to that, because the alternative is obviously going back to cities and to counties to be able to enforce their own law. What would be problematic about that to you?
Well, the question almost is the answer. The problem we would have is a patchwork of policies around the state. And I live in Mill Creek, and you could just cross right over into Linwood. They might have a different policy. You could be in the county, and I just don't think that is what we want when it comes to a serious issue like this. And that's just that is an approach that I'm hopeful that it doesn't come down to that.
Yeah. The other issue on public safety that was critical this year, we've done interviews about it, is the pursuit bill issue. Are you happy with where it ended up? So,
Brandi, before I even talk about what we did with pursuits, I had an interview. I was on the phone with you one day, and after I got off the phone, I remember telling my staff, I said, she came out swinging. But it was a fair swing.
Yeah.
People heard what you said. They heard your passion, and I was able to walk out of that interview, and I said, we need to get something done. So I'm quite pleased. I learned a lot in the process. I learned that it's the House and the Senate. I served in the House for 16 years, and I've been in the Senate for just 2 years, and I tell people they are exactly the same, just different. And I found that you just have to work members a little bit hard. You have to get to know them. You have to share stories. And I was able to really have better conversations with people after our interview, because I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people heard the interview. And I would go places and they would say, I heard you on the radio. I heard you on the radio.
Yeah.
So you had a lot to do with getting some legislation. Because if you remember, we didn't even get a hearing on the bill. There was not a hearing in the Law and Justice Committee, but we brought it straight to the floor. And I hope you will at some point, when you see the good work that's going on in law enforcement, the fact that they have the tools to do their job to the best of their ability, you had a lot to do with that. And I mean that sincerely.
I appreciate that. And I think a lot of credit, I know behind the scenes, and we're going to have him in the studio later in the week, is Senator Mark Mullet, who
Absolutely.
I know he was working behind the scenes to try to yank that thing from the depths of committee to bring it to the floor. And I was actually at this on the Senate floor when you guys in the wings when you passed it. I'm still not happy with the bill.
Yeah.
Because the chief complaint is that it doesn't include stolen vehicles. And when we see what's happening on our streets, I think leaving that out is such a mistake. So why couldn't you guys get it to that point? And because you believe if you had it your way, because you were part of a bipartisan bill that would have included stolen vehicles, right? At the beginning of the session.
Right.
So why couldn't we get it to that point?
So this is what I always think about, and I think about, we just finished the basketball season, NCAA, and I heard a guy say that it's not who you play, but when you play them. In the legislature, it's the same thing. It's not what you sponsor, but when you sponsor it. We probably, most likely, would not have passed this bill last year or next year. Mm-hmm. This was the year to do it. Maybe next year we'll probably do something with stolen cars. I'm not sure that we will or that we won't, but there's a possibility. I'm just kind of not quite 100%. I'll say I'm not 100% there yet with pursuing vehicles, pursuing stolen vehicles, because I drive an old beater, a 2011 Equinox. Do I really want to put people at risk? You can always replace a car, but you cannot replace a life or those injuries that you get from pursuing stolen cars. That's just me. And I'm going to tell you, I listen, and I'm looking at
the look on my face,
and I know you're not yielding an inch on this one.
Yeah.
And I won't forget our conversation today, and I'll listen to conversations from other people, and we'll see where we land on this.
Well, I think there are some strong arguments, and you have a law enforcement background, and so I'm kind of trying to speak to that right now, because when it comes to stolen vehicles, John, that they don't steal. The majority of people who are stealing vehicles, it's not a joyride. They're not like, oh, here's a car, I'm going to take it around the block. From your law enforcement experience, and I should call you Senator, not John.
That's okay.
From your law enforcement experience, why do people steal cars?
It's a variety of reasons. Sometimes they are stealing it for a joyride, but sometimes they're stealing it for profit. We brought you probably don't know this, but in 2007, I sponsored the original legislation to really go after car thieves, to set up the auto theft account, the Auto Theft Prevention Authority. And a lot of people steal them, strip them down, and sell the parts. I don't know if that is going on, but a lot of it is for profit. Steal the car and maybe sell the parts later on, joyrides, not have to buy their own car. There are a number of reasons.
But you're leaving out a big reason why people steal a car.
Why don't you tell me?
I like to have you just say it to perpetrate another crime. And we've seen a lot of violent crimes, robberies, all sorts of things perpetrated with a stolen vehicle.
I heard Senator Patton say that the other day. He's on the Senate floor. He pretty much said, yeah, you're probably right about that. But what I will say is we put a lot of money in the budget this year. We put like $7 million over 2 years to make sure we do things to prevent cars from being stolen. I've seen situations, I'm sure you've seen them, where people will hop out of their car, run in a house real quick and leave the car running. Those are things that we need to work on with the Auto Theft Prevention Authority to try and have people. I'm not blaming the person for having their car stolen, but I'm saying we need to do more to keep that car from being stolen.
Yeah.
But you are right. They are done to perpetrate other crimes.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll grant that.
And that's kind of my concern is we've led to this place of a real lack of respect for the rule of law, where you have people calling 911 saying, hey, the police can't pursue me. And so drug trafficking, for instance, we acknowledge there's a lot of things we can agree on here. There is, first of all, police pursuits are dangerous. Of course they are. We don't want somebody driving at 104 miles an hour. They're dangerous for police, everyone involved, the public, 100%. No one is saying we want police to pursue people for any reason and just because it's fun and we can watch it. But on drug trafficking, for instance, if I'm running a Mexican drug cartel, I'm not, but if I were, why would I not traffic drugs in Washington? Why would I not? If I am somebody working for a drug cartel, I've got a bunch of drugs, hidden in my car somewhere. I know that I can drive away. And that they're not going to pursue me because under the law they cannot. So why would I not keep shoveling drugs into the state of Washington that's killing people on our streets, in our communities, when I know that they're not going to do anything about it?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. And I obviously, your message is that we have a lot of work to do. And what I always tell people is that the reason I come on shows like this is because I want to listen, I want to learn, I want to help, and then I want to lead. I've listened, I've learned quite a bit, I'm in a position to help, and then we need to lead. And I want to be a leader in this area. And we have work to do, and we're going to get it done. I'm confident that we're going to get it done. But I'm hopeful that the public will realize that you have to have respect for our laws. You have to have respect for authorities because I talked about accountability. We've demanded that our police officers be held accountable, but the public has to be held accountable. And I think this pursuit legislation that you helped pass, your name won't be on the signature. I'm sure the governor will invite you to the bill signing.
I wouldn't count on that. I don't think I'm allowed down there. Thank you.
You are. But we're hoping that this type of legislation will help us in this area.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there were a lot of Republicans who wanted to kill it and who did ultimately vote against it. And I encouraged them not to because my argument was you're in the minority. You can't get everything you want. And if the bill as written can save one life because police can pursue one person that they weren't able to pursue before, then that's what's best for the public. But at the same time, Republicans have said, well, Democrats are not going to fix it further. They're going to claim a win and say, hey, we listened to you, we've fixed police pursuits, and then they're going to move on. So do you believe, you're telling me you're committed to, where possible, making it better. Do you feel like the rest of your party shares that same commitment?
So what I learned in the process, I told you being in the House, it was just a different area, great people. What I have learned is that you have to spend more time listening and learning. And I've learned quite a bit. And I think that with the leadership that I hope to bring to the state Senate, I believe that if there are areas that we need to make adjustments, we will be able to make the adjustments in the area of pursuits.
Before we move on from public safety, do you believe the state of Washington is going to be safer after this session than they were before the session began?
I do. I really do. there are a lot of things that we did. I think when we start looking at, not just in this area of law enforcement, just doing things to help with housing and doing all of those things that we need to do to get people to care of the treatment, get people out of these homeless encampments. I think those are a lot of things that are going to make a difference. And you look at the great work that's going on in downtown Seattle. I mean, you have to admire what Mayor Harrell is trying to do. And I'm seeing a lot of great things in my county. And we're going to all have to work to be good stewards of this community, these communities.
So that is part of my conversation with Washington State Senator John Lovick, a Democrat from Mill Creek. I appreciate his thoughts there. I will say, we have now this situation, and if you're not familiar with where this puts us, specifically on the drug possession issue, if there isn't an effort to call a special session and come to a consensus on a drug possession law, then starting July 1st, we'll have de facto legalization at the state level in Washington. That being said, there are a lot of cities and counties that are putting their own laws in place that they can enforce at a local level to be a backstop for that. And I want to say during when we were playing that, actually, this is breaking news out of the city of Seattle. The Seattle city attorney and two of the reasonable, rational council members, Alex Peterson and Sarah Nelson, have come out and proposed legislation to prohibit the use of drugs in public places, including parks, sidewalks, bus stops, and public transit. They said in a statement that it's modeled after a similar ordinance that was passed this month in Bellingham. We talked about that as well. So you now have these hyper-progressive cities that are even saying, like, yeah, we can't have no drug possession law on the books. Ann Davison said in a statement, the epidemic of drug use is killing Seattle residents and depriving the public of spaces intended to be safe for everyone. We will not give up areas of our city to overt drug use and antisocial behavior, and this legislation will bring a critical tool to disrupt open-air drug markets, reclaim our green spaces and sidewalks, and protect transit riders. Again, this is no-brainer stuff. It's so common sense. I mean, we'll see if there is something that can be done on the state level before July 1st. But if you had all these other cities where they have political leaders with actual political will to get this done, and then if the city of Seattle doesn't put something on the books, can you imagine how much worse things will get in Seattle if they don't have a drug possession law on the books and other cities around Seattle do? And hopefully Mayor Bruce Harrell and more than just two council members recognize that. I'll also say just out now is a statement from the Downtown Seattle Association on that. They said Seattle's drug crisis is a public health emergency and it demands urgent action. The state legislature has failed to act, and therefore local leaders must step forward to address people dying on our streets and the many associated impacts these dangerous drugs have on our neighborhoods, and goes on to basically support putting a local policy in place. But you heard it from John Lovick, and I did appreciate the fact that he said we've let a lot of people down by not passing something. We've let a lot of people down, and I think that is very, very true. All right, coming up in a moment, we're going to get the Republican perspective on all of this. We'll hear from Representative Skylar Rude. He's a Republican from the other side of the state, all the way over in Walla Walla. But first, we've been telling you about MethodWorks.com, one of our wonderful sponsors that's offering an awesome opportunity for you if you're a small business owner. If you're a small business owner, you've been meaning to try to get outside help with your tech needs, whatever it is. Maybe you need a 24-hour help desk in case you run into issues, or you need to set up your employees with computers or get your information on the cloud, or, and this is important, and I don't think a lot of small business owners immediately think about it, data security and data protection. If you're a small business and you have some sort of data breach, that can be it for your business, like you're done. And so if you really need to start thinking and you've kind of convinced yourself like, okay, I need to take that seriously, I need to protect our data, our customers' data perhaps, reach out to MethodWorks, MethodWorks.com, because right now they're offering undivided viewers and listeners 1 month of free security monitoring and a free security review. So they can come in, look at all of your IT needs, try to help you with some solutions there. They're a one-stop shop for any tech needs you might have, but also they can talk about the importance of data security and what they can bring to the table on that. So again, MethodWorks.com, MethodWorks.com. Okay, I mentioned we're going to hear momentarily from Representative Skylar Rude, again, who's a Republican in the House. And so was behind the scenes on the final day of the session this past Sunday when it became clear that one of their top priorities as a legislature was just simply not going to happen, and that was passing a drug possession law. And so I talked to Representative Rood about that, about other public safety issues at play, and about the absolute insanity of Governor Jay Inslee attempting to blame Republicans, like Representative Rood, for voting no and killing this drug possession bill, even though, of course, Republicans aren't in the majority in the House, the Senate, and they don't have the governor's office. Here's part of our conversation. Take us into the last hours of the legislative session. So, of course, we're all waiting to see if they're going to be able to pass this watered-down fix for the Blake decision to sort of criminalize drug possession. You know, Lori Jenkins, the Speaker of the House, brings it to the floor. So I guess I thought, well, of course they have the votes then. Did you know they didn't have the votes?
No.
Did you assume they did?
I did, because that's never happened.
Right.
So someone leaned over to me and said, I heard they don't have the votes. And I said, well, obviously they do, because they don't bring bills to the floor if they haven't vote counted and have the votes. And then that happened. I'm like, what? Was
there an effort from Republicans to claim? So I thought of a couple scenarios. Like, did Republicans dupe her and say, oh, yeah, we have... No, there was no duping among Republicans to make Lori Jenkins think they had votes from you that they didn't.
No.
So this was purely her not knowing where her own caucus was going to vote on the issue.
That's what I would imagine.
How do you even make sense of that?
I mean, I can't say that no Republican said they were going to vote a certain way, but we've talked about this in caucus. I don't think that we were fully open about our position the whole time. We had our Republican member on that committee negotiating in conference. She voted no on it. Like, we have a written record that we opposed it before it got to the floor. So I don't know. I mean, we have 40 members. They have 58. And to see criticism that the minority killed a bill, and that it's almost like our no votes were worse than the 15 Democrat no votes. Mm-hmm. Like, they're all no votes. Like, why are you not attacking your own members if you're going to attack us?
Well, and it's gloriously predictable for Governor Inslee to have his press conference and say there were no Republican votes. I was deeply disappointed. And then also for some Democratic leadership to do the same thing. How do you combat that level of gaslighting?
This is like civics 101, like representative democracy, majority rules. Like, I don't even know.
Yeah. Because there's people who buy it hook, line, and sinker, like, oh, Democrat or Republicans, it's their fault that they're going to legalize drug possession. It's wild to me.
I don't know what to say because it's so absurd.
Yeah.
If it wasn't such a serious, I mean, it's kind of comical, but it's such a serious issue. This is a great example of partisanship.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like a disease in our system now, I think. It's purely partisanship, like blaming the other side.
So what do you think is going to happen between now and July 1st? You know, Inslee has said that he doesn't find this unacceptable, which, where was he? He wasn't that outspoken the last 4 months. There is a fear. I talked to Senator John Braun about his fear earlier this week that Democrats will just put together something on their own that's really weak just so they can say that they did something. What do you think will happen?
I don't know. And the minority were pretty much kept in the dark a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Because we're not making the decisions, as we just talked about. They're determining the agenda. They determine which bills come to the floor. So I think there will be negotiating happening before a special session is ever called. But I would hope that it would be something that would be bipartisan. I think Republicans are very interested in getting a bill in place. I voted no on the Blake. I can't even call it a fix. The attempt at a Blake fix.
The Blake fake is what someone has called it. Yeah.
Right. I think the one good piece of not having a bill is that local jurisdictions can criminalize possession. Mm-hmm. So it's not like there will be no state law on the books, but that doesn't mean that there can't be local laws on the books. And so we're not going to ultimately be a completely decriminalized state. There may be counties and cities across the state, probably more on this side of the mountains, that may completely decriminalize, but it does preserve some level of local control to not have a bill.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm okay with that because to have some bill that's like a Seattle-style bill that now the entire state has to abide by would be very problematic given the state of Seattle. Would you support any sort of compromise that drops drug possession below a gross misdemeanor?
Yes.
You would support something lower than that?
Yeah, I think a misdemeanor is fine. A misdemeanor is up to $1,000 fine and 90 days in jail.
Wow, even John Lovick sat here as a Democrat and said he would not support anything below a gross misdemeanor.
Interesting. I think the reason that many Republicans are not supporting the misdemeanor versus gross misdemeanor is because of the statute of limitations is only a year for misdemeanor. I believe it's 2 years for a gross misdemeanor. So considering backlog in the courts right now, there's potential that a misdemeanor wouldn't even be prosecuted if the process took longer than a year.
So what stopped you from supporting the Blake fake, which dropped it to a misdemeanor?
It would have prohibited local jurisdictions from criminalizing drug paraphernalia.
So it was the local preemption aspect,
which I think is a pretty big deal. So okay. I would love to find a bill that I could vote yes on. I mean, I voted yes on a previous version of the Blake bill. So, and we could even do something that, well, I think there are two components here. There's the criminal aspect. I don't think that incarcerating people for possession is typically the right approach. Mandatory treatment is. The bill also did not have, I think you could say, teeth in it to ensure that people are completing their treatment. Yep. So that was another problem with it. That was a deal breaker. But if we had mandatory treatment outside incarceration, I would definitely go that route first. For repeat offenders, I think that's when it becomes more of a criminal issue where we're going to have to incarcerate. So yeah, I'm hopeful, but also not holding my breath that we're going to get something I can vote for.
I guess, when they say, we can call a brief special session, I think you had 4 months. Like, what are you going to accomplish behind the scenes that you couldn't accomplish in 4 months? I guess from an insider perspective, what should people make of the fact that what should have been one of the top priorities did not get done?
I think there's a vocal minority in the Democratic Caucus that has too much power. Because Republicans would just need a good handful of Democratic votes to move a bill forward, and so we're not really seeing truly a democratic process. There could be a bill that would get enough Republican support and Democratic support to pass. I know that. There's enough interest in doing that, but ultimately it's the Democratic Caucus that chooses which bills to move forward, and not us. We're not setting the agenda, so. It'll be up to them to determine what they're willing to do that can get Republican support.
The way you said that is interesting because you said, this vocal minority of the Democratic Party that has too much power. And you're so right because it's almost like there's this deference to them, even though you can pass bills without them. Mm-hmm. But there's this deference among the Democratic caucus to this further left fringe of their party. That's really odd to me because they also did it with Pursuit Bill. They allowed Manka Dhingra until the very end to wrap up police pursuits in her committee, not give it a hearing, even though had it hit the floor that day, there would have been enough support from Democrats and Republicans to pass it. I don't get the sense that Republicans have that kind of deference to the right wing of their party.
Right.
Why do you think Democrats have so much deference to the far left fringe of their party to allow them to derail such important issues?
I don't know. I'd love to be in that caucus room to see how those conversations are going. You probably remember Republicans had a procedural to bring the Pursuit Bill up on the floor. Yep. And even though there were 18 or 19 Democrats that had co-sponsored that bill, presumably would vote for it, not a single Democrat voted to bring that bill to the floor for a vote. So, what kind of strong arming goes on, I don't know. But that's a great example of how partisan the process is, and they operate as a team. Oftentimes, obviously, in this case, we had Democrats that were voting against this bill, while most of their caucus was voting for the bill. But that's really frustrating to know that there's a bill that, if we were doing final passage, it could have passed. So that's an example of where the majority isn't being heard in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and it's anti-democratic. The Democrats always want to say, oh, Republicans are the threat to democracy. And I'm like, you guys won't let people vote on bills that have enough votes to pass. It's very strange, their version of what is sacrificing democracy.
I've had, without naming any names, I've had Democratic members express their views on a bill to me personally, and in one case actually ask us to run a bunch of amendments on a bill to try to kill it.
Oh, you won't name names?
And then we didn't. The bill came up, and the member voted for the bill.
Wow.
I'm like, that's frustrating to me that members I feel free to vote however I need to in my caucus.
Yeah.
Clearly, on the other side, there are members that don't feel free to vote the way they feel they should be voting. And that's sad.
That is sad. Name names, Representative Rood. I want names. I want a list of names. I think you've figured out we're going to go long on the show today. I like that we can just expand the show whenever we have more stuff. But it was important to get to some of the meat of what happened in Olympia and hear those different opinions from the perspectives from Democrats and Republicans now that the session is done and they can come join us in studio. I will say, however, subscribers are in for a special treat on Sundays with Subscribers, because I also asked all three of those gentlemen about two controversial bills. And I think it'll be particularly interesting to hear from the two Democrats on this, because both Senator Mullet and Senator Lovick voted to ban semi-automatic assault rifles. And they voted in favor of Senate Bill 5599, the bill that allows your child to run away to a shelter and you not be notified of where they are. And so as moderate as those two Democrats are, they still voted in favor of two bills that I am vehemently opposed to. I'm sure some of you are as well. So on Sundays with Subscribers, we're going to hone in on those two issues with all three of those state lawmakers. You're not going to want to miss it. So if you're not a subscriber yet, go to undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com, and click on subscribe to support the show. And that way you can watch our Sundays with Subscribers, which is exclusive to subscribers, on Patreon or local. So now's a great time. If you care about those two issues, the ban on semi-automatic assault rifles and Senate Bill 5599, which has to do with the erosion of parental rights, I am going to have a long conversation with both of those two Democratic senators about why they supported those two efforts. So it's definitely something that you're going to want to catch. Again, undividedpod.com. All right, sellwithwest.com. If you're thinking about selling your home, check out sellwithwest.com, a better way to sell your home. And our friend Wes Jones can give you all sorts of information on the state of the market right now and detail their really innovative marketing strategy to get you the best possible price for your home. Another thing, if you want to go to sellwithwest.com, you can click on their tab to find out their home value tab. So if you're kind of curious, like the market's been a little softer, you might be surprised by how much your home is actually worth. And they have this really, really easy little calculator on their website at sellwithwest.com where you can figure out what your home value is. But Wes Jones, we've had him in to chat before we added them as a sponsor to the show. And he says that although the market has just been up and down, it certainly isn't at where it was at its peak. They are seeing an opportunity and a window of opportunity for home sellers right now to get some competing offers, and to even get cash offers again. So visit sellwithwest.com. Again, that's sellwithwest.com, and ask Wes Jones whether this is the right time to sell your home. And he'll be honest with you if he thinks you ought to wait a little bit longer, or if you should pull the trigger now. So again, visit sellwithwest.com, a better way to sell your home. Okay, this is interesting. I'm sure you guys have seen this everywhere. We're going to get to our segment Unbelievable in a moment. I will say, it is not uncommon for politicians to ask us to provide them with questions before someone comes in. Nicole, you've been a producer for a long time. And when you did Dory's show, did you find that people who come on would say, hey, can you give me questions before?
Oh, yes, all the time.
And what would your response be as a producer?
Sorry, I don't ask story first questions beforehand, but, I'll give topics sometimes.
Topics? Well, yeah, of course. Obviously. You're not going to be like, just, hey, come on, I won't tell you what we're going to talk about. Yeah, very common to be asked, But I would hope that no journalist is like, sure, let me type out questions for you so you can prepare yourself for the interview at hand. So this all has to do with something that played out at the White House, and a journalist that appears to have offered President Joe Biden questions ahead of time. Let's talk about it in our segment, Unbelievable. Boop. Okay, so we know that Biden has been caught having like some cheat sheets, in the past where, I mean, we've talked about, kind of his mental state and whether he's really fit to do the job. And sometimes his cheat sheets will be like very clear, bolded directions from his staff about like, walk off stage to the left, introduce so-and-so, like very bullet by bullet, here's what to do.
They always capitalize Y-O-U.
Y-O-U. Like we're talking about
every time.
You, Mr. President. Mm-hmm. And so and what I love about it is that the a little quick like Getty Images photographers and AP photographers will, because he'll inevitably accidentally show what's on his sheet and he'll snap a picture of it like in high resolution and you can see what was on it. So check this out from article from the New York Post where this happened at a press conference. So there was a joint press conference with the South Korean president, and Biden was, they had the press conference and then they were going to take questions. And his little cheat sheet that he had in front of him was snapped by, I think this was Getty Images. And, sometimes when it's just directions for what the president should do, fine. But take a look at this. If you're watching on the stream, it has a little thing at the top. It says Reporter Q&A, April 26, 2023. It says question number 1. And then it has the name and picture of the journalist from the Los Angeles Times. Her name is Courtney Subramania, and it also has the pronouncer spelled out for him. And if that were it, that would be fine. Like, okay, you're helping him. You know what she looks like. You know her name. You know the outlet. You know how to say her name. And you're also being told that that's going to be the first question you take as the president. Well, then it gets into a question. It has a question listed below. It says foreign policy, semiconductor manufacturing, and it says, how are you squaring your domestic priorities like reshoring semiconductor manufacturing with alliance-based foreign policy, so on and so on and so on. So for all intents and purposes, it looks as if this outlet, the Los Angeles Times, and this reporter provided the White House with a question in advance, and that it was identified that that reporter would be able to ask the first question. Now, the question that she actually asked was much more involved than that. It certainly wasn't verbatim. We can play a clip of President Biden opening it up for questions.
Now we're going to take some questions. The first question is from Courtney of the Los Angeles Times.
Oh, you don't say.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your top economic priority has been to build up U.S. domestic manufacturing in competition with China. But your rules against expanding chip manufacturing in China is hurting South Korean companies that rely heavily on Beijing. Are you damaging a key ally in the competition with China to help your domestic politics ahead of the election?
Yeah. So again, it was a more involved question, but it got to the root of what was on this card, which is how are you squaring your domestic priorities like reshoring semiconductor manufacturing with alliance-based foreign policy? And that is, so people on the internet were saying, oh, this happens all the time. I will say that does not happen all the time. That is not an acceptable practice in any sort of journalistic field. I've never experienced that. I mean, I've never done that, provided specific questions. Again, you provide topics because who would come on your show if you're like, hey, come on and we're not going to tell you what we're discussing. Of course, you provide general topics of discussion. But the idea that you would have a journalist for the Los Angeles Times provide the president of the United States, obviously his staff, with a question about, and again, it wasn't framed that exact way, but a pretty good idea of what he's going to be asked is so contrary to the job of the media. It is truly unbelievable to me, but I wanted to cover it today. And the reason it is unbelievable is because I will defend the press on this. That is not a normal practice. That whoever decided to provide a question that had that much specificity should be fired. Whether it was this reporter, an editor for that reporter, I don't think we fully have an understanding yet of what happened there. But if the White House is expecting that journalists provide them with specific questions in order to be called upon, and this was one of only a couple reporters who actually got to ask a question at this event. And so all of this was like preordained, and that is truly unbelievable. And it should not happen when we have, look, if it was China, if this was, I've been at an event before at the Westin in Seattle back when I was with Fox 13, where I believe it was the Chinese president who was visiting, and the Chinese media is state-run media. So of course, like, Chinese media is going to have their questions spelled out, so the Chinese president knows exactly what they're going to ask, and he's totally prepared for it. We're not China. That is something that would happen with Chinese state media, and it is 100% unacceptable and unbelievable that it's happening in the United States of America. All right, you might have noticed at the beginning of the show, if you were listening, I had a little piece of birthday cake for Nicole. And you know what? Life is all about balance. It's all about enjoying those life moments, but also taking control of your health. And that is what I have done with EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. I have lost around 35 pounds on the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic plan from when I started at the beginning of November. I feel so much better. It's mortifying to look at old pictures of myself. But look, it's not just about the pounds on the scale. It is about how I feel, and I feel significantly better. I choose something out of my closet, and I just wear that. Women will know what I'm talking about. Nicole will know what I'm talking about. When you don't feel good about yourself, you could try on 100 things.
And nothing fits.
And nothing, either that doesn't fit or you don't like how you look in it. It's so nice to just go to my closet and be like, yeah, I'll take that. And then just take it to work and be like, that's what I'm wearing today. It's the best feeling ever. So if you've been thinking that you need to take control of your health a little bit, do what I did. Reach out to the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. Go to EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. And while there, you can schedule a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Ryan Coogan, who is awesome. You will absolutely love him. And you don't even have to go into the clinic. Like I said, you can do the free 15-minute consultation online, talk through the program, see if it's right for you and your needs and where you're at in your health journey. And then you can decide if you want to proceed with the program from there. But I've heard from so many of you already who have started the program since I started doing a sponsorship for them at the beginning of the year, and you're already down 20 pounds, 30 pounds. I saw a picture on their Instagram account of a guy who cut 50 pounds, and he's just looking good ahead of summer. Do it for yourself. Okay, so yeah, EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. Check them out. All right, as I said, we're going long today. We heard going long today because I heard somebody, Matt, in the chat said, oh, I don't think we're going to have time for a Florida report. Yes, we do. Yes, we have time for Florida report. So let's check in on what's happening in the Sunshine State.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Miranda, hello.
Hello.
Man, there's just a lot of good political stories out of Florida, which is why we'll never end Florida Report, because it's just too juicy. So
it's a juicy state.
Juicy state. We're going to get to the Trump-DeSantis weird beef, which is just so odd to me. Because, you know, they did like each other. But in the DeSantis-Disney saga, there is a new wrinkle. Enlighten us.
Yeah, so on Wednesday, Disney filed a suit to sue Governor DeSantis, alleging that DeSantis is waging a targeted campaign of government retaliation against Disney. And this came just like minutes after, you know, like Disney kind of put a kibosh on that new council that DeSantis put in place. They were trying to restrict Disney's ability to use their land as they'd like, to do developments, new parks, some housing for the people who work for the cast of Disney. And they kind of were like, oh, you can't do that. So minutes after that happened, they filed this lawsuit. And it is just a back and forth between Disney and DeSantis. And it's all just kind of in response to the whole quote unquote, don't say gay bill. And it's getting a little out of hand, in my opinion.
I tend to agree. I don't like it. I mean, as much as I don't think companies should get special treatment, right? Yeah. I think that it's just as bad to have, as this lawsuit puts it, a targeted campaign of government retaliation over basically ideology. Now, do I think that Disney is trying to wokeify our youth? Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, but I don't think that it is in keeping with the limited government approach to sort of go after Disney in this way. So I wish DeSantis would be more reasonable about it. Don't particularly enjoy it.
I mean, also in consideration that people love Disney. Disney absolutely has a huge influence on our culture and our children. And even Disney adults are very high numbers down here in Florida and across the nation. And Disney is also a huge employer in the state. So I think they really need to kind of put the fighting gloves down and start working together, because Florida needs Disney and Disney needs Florida. I mean, they're not going anywhere. So it's time to maybe have a meeting of minds rather than headline fights on a constant basis.
Yeah, and again, I'll go back to, the ability of a business to operate essentially as its own independent entity and state. I also have an issue with that, as big as Disney is and as important as it is to the state's economy, but there has to be a happy medium between what the war that DeSantis has waged against Disney and Disney just operating however it wants, however it sees fit. Okay, let's get to the Trump-DeSantis thing is so petty. It's like, and honestly, I don't think DeSantis has fed into it. So I give him credit for that. But Trump is so petty about DeSantis being popular. And he's just sort of like trying to paint Florida as this crap state to make DeSantis look bad when Florida's obviously not a crap state.
Yeah, I think Trump's very good at this, at convincing his constituents and followers that he's great because other things are awful. And like, he has property here in Miami alone. He's got like 5 properties. He lives in Mar-a-Lago. Like, he lives in Florida, right. And he's going to talk trash about Florida being this awful, totalitarian state and like a dystopian wasteland, I think he had once mentioned. And it's like he fully supported DeSantis just a few years ago, and he supported what DeSantis was doing in Florida during the pandemic. And then suddenly now it's this major flop to a different direction. And I think it obviously all comes down to him probably being a little worried about DeSantis running for president, which hasn't even been announced yet. It's just another petty fight happening in our state.
Yeah, it's silly. And I kind of find myself like wondering like who buys into that, because so Kim Strassel, she's a conservative columnist for the Wall Street Journal. She wrote, Trump has suddenly decided it's in his interest to claim that Florida is a really high tax hellhole, which just simply isn't true. And the Trump camp, according to Fox, they put out this press release with a statement from Trump's spokesperson saying, the real DeSantis record is one of misery and despair. He has left a wake of destruction all across Florida. And that's just patently absurd. And so I just wonder who doesn't see through that. And in kind of keeping with this, another interesting story that came out, it just kind of proves that, like, what is Trump talking about? Florida has some cities in the U.S. that have like the lowest unemployment rate. Can you talk about that?
Well, it has, yeah. So 4 out of 5 of the largest metro areas in the U.S. with the lowest unemployment rate are in Florida. I think that also, this article out of Fox Business talks about how that plays into not only a growing hospitality industry down here. The state is openly welcoming businesses to come in. And when you let businesses come, they create jobs. In addition to that, the state grew just in a matter of like 24 months, almost 300,000 plus people. So that is a lot of people to come in that are ready to work from different states that are jumping in to not only create jobs, but take jobs too. So, Miami-Dade is one of the highest ones in the state of like with the lowest unemployment rate. And, our mayor actually just had a really, really cool seminar these last 2 days about just like what's happening in Miami, and like thousands of people showed up. He was extremely involved in making, in the conference, speaking and just talking about everything that they've done to improve the living situation in Miami. I do think a lot of that low unemployment rate comes down to the fact that it is extremely expensive to live here. So a lot of my friends have 2 jobs. So there's we're doubling up on the jobs down here just to afford to live here. So there might be a little bit of a dark side to those numbers as well, but we're definitely doing great. And I can't see why people can't see through that, the hate that comes from Donald Trump. Obviously Florida there's a reason people are coming here.
Yeah, you just got to kind of ignore it and see it for what it is. It's pettiness. But as you said, you mentioned Miami. Fox Business says Miami had the lowest unemployment rate of metropolitan areas with more than 1 million people in February at 2.2%. And we've talked a lot about Miami Mayor Francis Suarez and how, I think he would make a wonderful addition to a presidential ticket, or I know he's considered running for president himself, but what he's been able to do and his making a concerted effort to attract business investment and the tech sector, while other places like Seattle and California and the Silicon Valley are just scaring people away. There's a reason why Florida is doing well, and those steps are part of it. So, all right, Miranda, well, you have just a wonderful weekend down there in sunny Florida, and we'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Meow. No.
That was
it's the
an
noise
aggressive
alligators
meow.
make 100%. Okay, let's get to some comments, shall we? On Tucker Carlson, in his video that he put out discussing not really any of the drama, just sort of the state of media and everything, which I thought he was just spot on saying that the moment that we're in as a society is too inherently ridiculous to continue, which I pray to God he's right. Greg says, makes me wonder if we had World War III, if we would work together or if half the country would go to the other side. I would hope that, and sometimes unfortunately it takes like a catastrophic incident. That's why I'm like, bring on the alien invaders. Like, bring on the alien invaders, because that might be the only thing that can unite us. Larry on Facebook wrote, Brandi, why aren't you talking about the 3 unconstitutional gun laws just passed? Larry?
I thought he deserved to be called out. That's
Larry,
why I added
that's all
that.
we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
Larry, is
every
this
day.
the first episode of Undivided, which is fine if you're new to the show. But actually, it's one of my pet peeves when people say, why didn't you cover this? And I'm like, did you Google to see if I did? Because I probably did. In this case, yes, we have done a lot of coverage on those, including just yesterday. And then on Sundays with subscribers, we'll be talking more about it. So Larry, you gotta watch more regularly.
Right. And
no
they're
worries.
still available. You can go and catch up.
You can go back. In fact,
Yes.
go to undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com, and catch up on all the episodes you may have missed. Andy on Patreon, on our interviews with the 2 Democratic senators, Mark Mullet and John Lovick, Andy says, both Senators Mullet and Lovick are reminders of how Olympia is supposed to work. Yeah, do I agree with them on everything? No, but they also realize that they can't live in an echo chamber, that doesn't serve people in the best way, and I appreciate them for that, and I appreciate their willingness to talk about, how ridiculous it was that Democrats brought a bill to the floor for drug possession that they didn't have enough votes to pass, and then blamed Republicans for it, which is super strange. Todd writes over on YouTube, it is time for caucus meetings to be public, workshop style. Public doesn't need to comment, but we should be able to watch. Yeah, I mean, look, I always tend toward more transparency is better because they work for us. But I do realize that sometimes that there are internal debates that would not happen if not for that privacy element of it. So I don't believe that everything they do should have to be public, because I think they should be able to hash out their differences and work towards something without worrying about every little thing they say. So, I mean, more transparency is always better, but I think there are some things where, you got to keep that under lock and key. Let me see. Is this also just a different Todd, or is it the wrong name?
No, it's the same Todd.
Oh,
That's
it's the
why
same
I put it
Todd.
right underneath.
Oh, and then he said in Snohomish County, cars are being stolen and dropped off at the Quilceda Creek Casino parking structure. My son's car was taken there. The tow truck says they get those calls daily. You know what I saw? I should have grabbed the picture. I posted on my social media accounts like a month ago. At the North Bend Outlet Mall, there was this car that had been parked there for a while because it had some like warning tickets from like the parking lot people there. Had like a dozen bullet holes in the windshield, right? Like where the driver would sit. And I'm like, is this person dead?
Wait, it had the bullet holes and they were giving it tickets still? And nobody
Yeah,
called
nobody had
it
come
in?
to get it. Nobody had come to get it. And I was like, I don't know if the police knew about it, but I should have called 911, but I posted on social media. But clearly the car had been there for a while. It was just full of crap. It had been spray painted white, the car. You could tell it was spray paint. Right. And it had no license plates. So clearly it's a stolen car. They probably used to commit a crime. And then somebody riddled it with bullet holes. But I'm like, is the driver okay?
Right.
Are they dead? Anyway,
I thought that was good information, I guess.
That
if you're in
was.
Snohomish County and your car goes missing, maybe
Or
call the
if
tow
you're in
company.
Snohomish County and you're looking to steal a vehicle, apparently you can just drop it off at Quilceda and you're not going to get
right, don't give
pursued
advice.
for it. Oh, okay, gotcha. Arlita says on Facebook, Mullet is right. It's better when both sides debate and come together. Hard when even the president is calling half the country terrorists. Well, I don't like the president and Jay Inslee and all the MAGA Republicans. They've what does that even mean? They call every Republican a MAGA Republican and just about fear-mongering. And even members of our congressional delegation are doing that. And I'm like, I just don't understand the desire to be so divisive. It's weird. Elle wrote, because I asked people, do you think that there's going to be movement to improve police pursuits next year? Elle writes, next year, so we get to have the stolen vehicle issue increase even more, and the argument of injuries to people is moot. There are far less injuries from pursuit than what the thieves do with these vehicles themselves. I agree. They commit more crimes with the stolen vehicle. I agree. To me, it's just absolute common sense. It doesn't make sense to me that they're trying to argue that, oh, this is just a property crime issue. No big deal. Just let them steal your car. That's what insurance is for. Sometimes you just can't make sense of it. Okay, speaking of things we cannot make sense of, let's end as we normally do with a little sanity check. All right, earlier this week on the show, we played this clip from a meeting. Actually, our friend Jason Rance over at 770 KTDH had first done a story on this, but there are, the Olympia School District is debating budget cuts. And they talked about maybe cutting some musical programs for young people, like 4th and 5th graders. And if they were talking about that purely from a budgetary standpoint, like, okay, that's better than cutting core classes or something like that. Yeah, maybe 4th graders don't need to play wind instruments, right? But it was an individual, in fact, it's the school board director, Scott Cliffthorne. He, at a meeting on April 17th, suggested it wasn't just for budgetary reasons, that perhaps they would also need to, or could cut these classes and justify it because band lessons for 4th and 5th graders are rooted in white supremacy. Here's what he said.
There's nothing about string or wind instrumental music that is intrinsically white supremacist. However, the ways in which it is, and the ways in which all of our institutions, not just schools, but local government, state government, our churches, our neighborhoods, inculcate and allow white supremacy culture to continue to be propagated and cause significant institutional violence are things that we have to think about carefully as a community. And I think that we have to do that interrogation, and we have to address the ways in which it creates challenges for administering the educational day for our elementary learners while we retain the program. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, your thoughts suck. You shouldn't have shared them. And I want to apologize to Mr. Cliffthorne because I said it was a woman making those comments, and he just has a very, not judging. I just thought it was a woman's
I think
voice.
It's the speaker.
Maybe that's part of it. But anyway, so Como News talked to this Cliffthorne fella about the comments, and Nicole and I were both surprised that Como covered the fact that, critically covered the fact that this dude thinks 4th and 5th grade band is rooted in white supremacy. And he provided them a statement. So I'm going to just read the statement that he provided to Como News. He writes, "My comments related to white supremacy culture is that predominantly white communities can sometimes display certain characteristics, like a sense of urgency, defensiveness, or thinking." What? To support and perpetuate systems that benefit themselves and not necessarily all. We need to be aware of that and work against it. In this instance, it is not the curriculum. Rather, I would like to see instrumental music structured and administered in a maximally inclusive way. Again, we're talking about wind instruments for 4th graders here. As you can see in my comments, I don't believe white supremacy culture is unique to music education, the Olympia School District, our state, or this country for that matter. It is our moral obligation to think critically and make mindful policy decisions that expand access, fight discrimination, and promote equity, especially in the context of deciding budget reductions. My comment was intended to encourage students, staff, administrators, and our community to be mindful of the work we all need to do to ensure our programs serve all students and families. Look, that is insane. And I go back to how we started the episode today with comments from Tucker Carlson talking about how this moment in time is too inherently ridiculous to possibly last, and about how the only way to move past it and to fix it is for reasonable people to say what's true calmly. And I will say what's true calmly to the Olympia School District and to this gentleman. It is not racist to want to keep a music program for 4th and 5th graders. Band is not inherently racist. It is not institutional violence. And if you think that it is, might I suggest that you have absolutely no place in a position of authority to influence the public education of our school students, because that opinion that you offered is simply insane. All right, that is it for today's episode of Undivided. Overtime, Undivided OT on Nicole's birthday. Whoop, whoop. 31st birthday or something like that. You know, before we wrap up the show, I'll say, and you can also put yourself on camera for this because I know it'll be embarrassing. Oh. This is the year where we need to find a good man for you.
Oh, every year.
Every year.
That seems to be a goal every year. But
so I would say if you're...
Cool.
No.
I'm all right.
No. If you're aged 40 to 50...
Oh.
We're not going lower than 40. In the 30s, you don't need a man in his 30s.
Okay.
Okay, 40 to 50.
Okay, don't make the call out. That's weird.
I know it's weird. I know it's weird and awkward. That's who I am. You know, if you're like blue collar, you like the outdoors, rugged, you know, you can work with a power tool. You're not insane politically. You like cats.
Important.
Like you're going to be accepting of her 2 cats. Is that fair?
Fair.
Good.
I mean, you don't have to be obsessed with cats. I just have a lot of energy that I have time to put into them, but
if you
it's not like I'm obsessive.
Country music, okay?
Yeah, they have to be willing to go to Watershed.
Yeah, if you're looking for, and by the way, I would be there too if that like ups the ante or something.
There you go.
I don't know. If you're into a good nurturing woman who's going to cook for you, you know, I don't know.
It's very
traditional.
sexist.
Fine. Okay. Anyway.
You better cook for me too.
Bottom line is happy birthday, Nicole.
Both.
You know, why would we not use our platform to try to get you a date?
Okay.
I mean, great.
It's not the first platform that's been used for it, but
I know Dory used to do it. So, all right, Nicole, happy birthday.
Thank you.
A tease for our Sundays with Subscribers, which is our subscriber-only episode that airs on Sundays, where we have nice in-depth conversations on controversial issues. I think Sundays with Subscribers this week is the only place where you will hear 2 Democrats be grilled on their position on the semi-automatic assault rifle ban and their position to support Senate Bill 5599, which allows kids to run away to a shelter for gender care or reproductive care, and then the state won't tell you where they're at. This, I think, is the only show and the only place on Sundays with Subscribers where you will hear 2 Democrats who voted for both of those policies be actually questioned and asked to explain their votes. So if you want to watch Sundays with Subscribers this week and every week, visit undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com. Or if you're watching on our screen, just visit that black screen, undividedpod.com. There it is, undividedpod.com. And it's a one-stop shop for all things Undivided. You can figure out where to watch the show, where to listen to the show, but most importantly, you can figure out how to become a subscriber for $5 a month on Patreon or Locals. We would love to have you join this mission and this movement to give common sense a comeback. So I'll see subscribers on Sunday. I'll see the rest of you Monday at noon.